Hola, amigos, buenos dias. Bienvenido de nuevo a la segunda parte, Frenches Forge Part 2. Hey! Thanks so much for tuning back in. I'm super excited to have you guys come check me out. Checking me out, y'all. Checking me out, y'all. Don't I look so nice, y'all? Ow! My back. Oh! Oh, good Lord, have mercy on your soul, child. Anyway, welcome back to part two. Oh, I pinched my nerve in my back, and I'm a little grandpa. I'm a little knife making grandpa now, like my son. Today we're gonna be doing hunched over work. Here, let me show you. See, I'm just an old feller with a back brace, and we're gonna be probably making knives like this today. Oh boy, I'm all over the place today, y'all, but I appreciate you coming. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's continue on with this build. Last episode, we left off with finishing up the blade portion. We got this heat treated, we got the bevels ground up a little bit, and we also got our scales made. We still have a little bit of work to do with each thing. We're going to start the episode off by cutting out the handle scales. Now to do that, if you remember in the last episode, we took just a piece of scrap wood and we drilled a couple holes in it and kind of did like a test fit. I have cut that out on the bandsaw back here, and now we kind of can tell the shape of our handle. So what I'm thinking is we're going to go ahead and put this up over top of our scale. We'll trace it out and then we'll get it cut out with the bandsaw. Now before we trace and cut these scales out on the bandsaw, what I've done here is I've just taken some blue painter's tape and I've lined these scales up and taped them together. And that way the spacers will be even when we go to trace the thing on here and cut it out. We want both of these scales to pretty much mimic one another. And I feel like the best way to do that is to cut them at the same time when they're lined up. So this is a really good tip and a trick to accomplish that. So now we've got them taped together, we're going to trace it out and get it cut out. Let's go ahead and run it over to the bandsaw and get some of this extra stuff cut off. Okay, now that we've spent a little bit of time cutting out the handle and grinding it down just a little bit to kind of get the rough shape of the handle, we're ready to drill the holes. And so what I've done here is just kept the tape on the handles, and I have positioned the blade pretty close to where I want it in relationship to the holes and where I think it's going to line up good, and I've just taped it down to the handle. We're going to go ahead and start with the 1/4-inch drill bit and do our pivot pin first, and then we're going to drill the stopping pin behind it. Okay, so that's one hole down. Now we're going to run over to the bandsaw and we're going to cut off a piece of our mosaic pin and stick it in there so that we know it's really lined up well when we go to drill the second hole. Okay, so now that we have the pivot pin and the stopping pin drilled into the handle, this is where we're at. We just kind of do a quick test fit, and for the most part, I think it's turned out really, really good. Everything's pretty much in line. We'll have some more shaping to do, removing some of this extra stuff on the handle, but now we can kind of get an idea of what the friction folder is. So that's kind of what a quick look of what it may look like, close to it anyway. When it's done, you'll have the tab sticking up, and then you can use your thumb to pull it out. And then when you go to cut stuff, you have your thumb up here anyway, so it's not like it's going to fall down on you. You're using your thumb to cut. So when I was cutting the metal in the stopping pin, the hole anyway, I tried to intentionally leave it a little tight. And what I mean by that is, you know, once you go to open it, it has a lot of play in it until you get to this certain point where it's kind of difficult to get it to go all the way up. But once you do, then it kind of seats into that little groove that we drilled a hole into, and it kind of holds it, which is pretty cool. So, you know, that part was a success. Just leaving a little bit, tiny bit of extra metal around that circle that we drilled in here, I think is what's doing that. Will it hold up over time? I don't know. Probably not. But at least for now, it's doing what I thought it would do and what I wanted it to do. So now all we have left really is to put in the back spacer. That's going to be the next biggest part. And I think for this, what I'll probably end up doing is using another piece of flat stock and putting it back here to just kind of keep the backside from pinching or, you know, shuffling around. We'll be able to glue that up back there so that's solid. And then we'll just be into pretty much shaping the handle and getting an edge on this thing. So let's go to the next step of working on the back spacer. Okay, so here we are over at the bandsaw, and pretty much what I have done is I've tried to figure out the size of the spacer that's going to go back here. And to do that, I've pretty much just pulled the blade out some and taken our spacer piece, which is just 1080 high carbon steel, and put it in and tucked it in kind of behind it here. And then traced out with the pencil kind of the line of where the knife is going to go. And then what we can do is get that cut out, and we'll just then go back and cut any of the extra stuff hanging off, you know, the back side of the handle. We've got this spacer cut out and kind of ground down to where I think it's going to sit just about perfect here, where the blade is almost touching but not quite. We're now ready to remove the rest of the spacer. And to do that, I've just held this down here and flipped it over. And then I have traced out the line on the back side where we're going to remove the extra bit of spacer hanging out. So now we're ready to go ahead and get this section cut out, and then this will be our spacer. Okay, so now that we have the back spacer ground down and cut out to the shape that is going to work for this, and it's sitting on here relatively good, we're now going to put a hole into this spacer here. Because we're going to be doing a copper lanyard tube. And so I think that that will be pretty cool. Not that I'll put a lanyard on this, but we're going to need something other than epoxy to get this spacer to stay in place. So in order to accomplish this, what I intend to do is to drill a hole probably somewhere around here in the spacer. And then what we'll do is I'll probably go ahead and just temporarily super glue it on to one of the pieces and drill through the hole to get it lined up in the scale. And then we'll go ahead and put our other half of the scale back on, flip it over, and drill through that to get this other hole lined up. So let's go ahead and put a 1/4 inch hole in our spacer. This dude is getting hot. Bucket of water, bucket of water, bucket of water. Okay, so now that we have the hole drilled in the spacer, we're ready to put the other hole into the scales. Now, to do this without permanently fixing up the entire thing and trying to guess where this hole's at, what we're going to do is we're going to super glue this piece to the first side of the handle scales here, and we'll get it in line and super glue it. And then we'll bring it over to the drill press and just stick our drill through this hole, which will then put a hole into this scale. We'll then take the other side, and using the front 2 pins, we'll put those on and line everything up. And then we'll be able to flip this whole thing over and drill from the hole that we're going to put in the backside. Okay, so now that we have the lanyard hole drilled through both sides of the scales and the spacer, we're now ready to move on to shaping this thing. And I feel like shaping this is going to be really easy without the blade in there. That way we don't have to work around the blade and, you know, run the risk of scratching up the finish on the spine or, you know, whatever else. Alright, so after profiling this to the blade and the spacer, we're now starting to kind of taper the thickness of the handle scales here. So we're starting to thin out this one side, and I kind of got that down. Now we're going to jump over to the bottom side here and start to thin that out. I really like a good taper in a handle where it's thinner towards the front or towards the blade, and then still having it thick in the back. That's going to make for a pretty comfortable grip. Before we continue to run on this, I got several different items from my mom for Christmas. This first one she got me is absolutely awesome. I want to say it's a maple burl with some green epoxy, and it looks like maybe some live edge, couple of live edge pieces with like a green and metallic epoxy in the middle. Just absolutely stunning. She also got me a couple of just ironwood blanks, and these are pretty interesting, and I'll definitely be able to utilize these in some full tang knives, so make some good scales. A couple of pieces of, I want to say, some sort of a burl, and they're not dyed, but man, they're just crazy. The grain and the burl pattern in there is just really, really cool. The last one that I got was another burl slash epoxy, and I think that would be really cool, and maybe a kitchen knife. Also might be a pine cone in here. There's almost like a face here. You can almost see like, a couple of eyes right there, and a shield and a mask. I don't know. You could look at these for days and see all kinds of things. But anyway, just really cool Christmas presents. Hopefully you guys out there got some wicked cool Christmas presents, some stuff to make some knives with. So yeah, I got all kinds of new fun stuff to mess around with. Let me know in the comments, what would you choose? If you could choose one of these, which one would you choose, and what would you do with it? Anyway, let's get back to grinding a little bit on this handle we're doing now. So I'm still right in the thick of it, trying to continue profiling this out and getting it ground down to the pencil mark that I've put on here. And I just came up for a breath of air, and I'm like, man, my back is still hurting me. This sucks. It's really hard to get up on the small wheel and bend over and try to see where the line is, and it's like really crappy. And then it dawned on me, I don't have to flip my body horizontally because the grinder flips horizontally. Duh! Oh man. Anyway, now that I put my brain back into my noggin and thought for a second, I'm going to get back to grinding this. Okay, so now that we've spent a little bit of time profiling this out, getting things smoothed and shaped out, we also spent some time beveling in the fronts and kind of putting 45s on the corners, and it's pretty well comfortable as it sits. But now what we're ready to do is pretty much glue this thing together. I actually tried getting this spacer off, and aside from putting a ton of heat on it, which I really didn't do, put a little bit of heat on it, I could not get this dang thing off. And I super glued the crap out of it. So I'm thinking the super glue might just be our best bet for this. Now, epoxy is really great also, but it's really messy. And for something like this, I think super glue is going to be just fine. This isn't a knife I'm going to be throwing around and beating up really hard. So super glue should do the trick. My thinking here is by taking this hole and chamfering it and kind of beveling it out some, hopefully that'll give a spot for the super glue to sit up against this pin and right around where it goes into the spacer. And then also doing it to the back here will definitely secure the back really well. I don't really have any issues with that. I think that's going to work really well. And then, as I'm sitting here thinking this, and I realize why most people use like some sort of a screw, is to apply pressure on the front here. But because we're using pins, I don't have that option. So what I'm going to do for the mosaic pin is, once we get this set, I'll probably go in and insert the mosaic pin and just dab a little bit of super glue just on the inside of this hole here, and then push it all the way through. because remember, when we go to glue this up, we're going to have the knife on it. And I certainly don't want to super glue the knife to the inside of this and have it stuck. So that still leaves us with the question of what to do to keep added pressure on the front so that it doesn't open up over time. So what I'm going to do to solve that problem is our stopping pin. What I plan to do is pretty much peen it over. And so what I've done is just beveled both sides of the scales where that pin is going to go in at. And then we'll just trim it shy and mushroom the tops over and peen it into place. That will give a mechanical bond that you then won't be able to pull apart. And we don't have to try to, worry about having a bunch of glue and just relying on just the super glue to hold this together. So I think between the combination of both of those things, this should be successful. So let's go ahead and get that done. Okay, so we just finished up getting both of the handle scales glued up, and I think it went pretty good for the most part. You can see we got the copper lanyard tube and the mosaic pin in there, and the mosaic pin turned out really good. You can clearly see all 4 layers that we put in there and the epoxy that was sucked down in between the pieces. So that part turned out really good. And the copper lanyard tube looks pretty sweet as well. Got a little bit of glue right there, but like I said, we got some more hand sanding to do. Off camera, I did the maker's mark on kind of the back of the tang. I'm not really sure what you'd call that part of a friction folder, but I thought it would be cool out there instead of on the blade. One thing to note too is most of the time that I do the maker's marks, I'm doing it on fresh metal. The look that I have on this is forge scale. This is really just straight out of a quench with the oils, and this is pretty much the finish that you're going to get off of a blade that you've quenched and tempered without really doing anything to it. And I just really liked the look. But I guess it's good to note that doing the maker's mark or trying to electrochemically etch the metal with that forge scale on produces a bit of a different look. Normally when I'm doing it on clean metal, I try to shoot for something like that, where it's deep and dark and black, and so that it stands out against the light metal. And it almost had the opposite effect on this, because our surface has the forge scale on it. It almost ate away to clean metal, so you kind of get like the negative of that. Anyway, kind of cool, and something that I learned this time around. I'm always learning things. Every time I make a new knife, I'm learning something, so this one I've learned quite a bit on. Let's go ahead and get the stopping pin, which will be this, peened into place, and then we'll finish hand sanding the handle and getting that all squared away. And then we'll really just be into getting an edge on this thing and giving it a test. have an edge put on this thing and we got it stropped, we now have one completed friction folder. This thing turned out super cool. I am so glad that I chose to do this project. I'm really just pleasantly surprised at the way that it turned out. I think for my very first one, definitely can call that a success. I really like the overall look and appearance of it. Decided to put a little lanyard on there. I don't know if I'll keep that, but it is pretty cool. And I think it'll be really handy having this in a pocket, you know, and just being able to pull it out at a moment's notice and cut some stuff with it. Over here I've got some super duper thin Nancy and Ronald Reagan U-line paper. We'll just give it a quick test. Yep, cut Reagan's head right off there. Sorry about that, sir. I don't know if I can even do this on YouTube or not. Oops. I guess we'll find out here shortly. Love that Ronald Reagan guy, though. Anyway, super duper sharp. Probably cut some hairs on my arm. You can see some dry skin and some hairs. Ooh, baby. What do you want from me? It's the winter. It's cold out here. My skin gets dry. Anyway, yeah, so definitely super happy with the build. Like I said, I think probably my favorite part is this backside. I decided to go ahead and get rid of the forged finish on the spine up here. And it's just something about the shiny metal and the black spacers and having this little bit of thumb texturing there with the spacers here. I don't know, it just looks really, really cool. And then, you know, having the forged finish to tie into kind of the rough look of the scales really, really looks cool. So anyway, I'm really glad that you guys stuck around to this point to check this thing out, and hopefully you got something from this video. You may now know how to make a friction folder, and hopefully it inspires you to get out and make one, or at least make something. Whatever your craft is, get out and do it. It's good for you. Tengo gratitud por que mires. Nos vemos la próxima vez.